fishing, it's in my soul.
Welcome to the Salt Strong Podcast, disrupting fishing entertainment as you know it. Prepare to laugh. Prepare to get to know fishing legends in a whole new and unfiltered way. And on occasion, you might even learn a thing or two about fishing. Here's your host, Joe Simons. Like diamonds.
Hello, Salt Strong Nation. Joe Simons. Like diamonds, we're back again. We're talking about the best saltwater lures that also catch bass, that bass can't resist. What's interesting is, our company's called Salt Strong, as you probably know, and it started with inshore saltwater fishing. And we have a community with now 25,000 members. And it's a place where you can go put in your fishing reports, talk about what you're catching, your tactics, tips, what lure or bait you caught it on. I mean, the entire rig, it's super helpful. And then, tons of it's all about trends and what's working right now, what the tide was doing. What's interesting is, it's kind of like a forum in terms of the fact that it's categorized by region, by time of year, and even by species. And one of our top 5 species is a saltwater fishing club is largemouth bass. And at first we're like, what's going on? Like, why are so many bass getting reported in the community? And it's pretty obvious. I mean, we're really kind of our members are from Texas to Florida to Virginia and everywhere in between. Obviously, we have members in all 50 states, but that's really the core is from Texas to Virginia. And if you just look at that, if you look at the Southeast, there's only so much land that is touching saltwater, right? It's obviously super expensive, and it's just not as accessible. Whereas if you look at those same areas, there's lakes everywhere. I mean, here in Central Florida, I mean, it's tough to drive 5 miles without, passing by or driving into a lake if you're not really careful. I mean, they're just everywhere. Here in Winter Haven, I mean, there's 24 lakes connected, or 21 lakes. There's lakes everywhere. So it makes sense that there's more diehard saltwater people that live on or near a lake or a pond. I know, Justin, you have a pond right behind your house. You test out a lot of our lures to make sure the bass will inhale them. I do as well. Luke, you're not too far from freshwater, even though you live on saltwater. So we're getting a lot of questions from our members saying, hey, like, what lures do you guys recommend? And the best news is you don't have to go buy a lot of new stuff. I mean, the same tackle for the most part. There are going to be a few little nuances we'll discuss, but and even rigging. But for the most part, a lot of the same soft plastics and hard baits that we're using to catch redfish and snook and trout and flounder, et cetera, and tarpon, they work just as great on largemouth bass. So we got Luke here. We got Justin. Who wants to kick this bad boy off with, if you could maybe pick your favorite lure that works for both freshwater and saltwater?
I'll just start in saying that. I mean, I grew up a total bass addict. I literally we were very fortunate. When I was like 11, we moved, and we were in Winter Haven, Florida, moved to a lake. It was a private lake. There's 3 lakes connected, no boat ramps. It was just loaded with bass. And so I literally fished like every day for like years. So I was out there every single day, and I was throwing
And let me tell you, they were jumping in the boat. They were everywhere.
Yeah. So plastic worm, Texas rig was my thing. And so like I had kind of like, in my mind, I had perfected the use of plastic worms, and I was good. I was catching a good amount of fish. And then I started learning saltwater. Eventually started learning about the weighted hooks and jerk baits. I was using these for bass fishing, but I was not using the weighted hook. I would use the normal unweighted hook, and I was catching a lot of bass with them. Then I kind of got super addicted to snook and redfish and trout. Didn't do so much bass fishing. And so I started like really getting on the flats with these 5-inch split tail jerk baits on these weighted owner twist lock hooks. And so then I went back home to visit parents and family, and I would take the exact same rig that I was catching snook, redfish, trout with, and I would throw it in the bass, and I'm now catching more bass than I ever did per hour with this same exact rig. And I was like mind blown that this what I thought was a saltwater lure was just crushing bass as well, and continued to even try other lures that we'll chat about. But this was the main one where, like, fishing, this goes great. You can rig it weedless, go through lily pads. You can take it through hydrilla. Like this is amazing in hydrilla or any other kind of underwater vegetation. It just darts through there. It's weedless, and just they just react to it. It's so just like a split tail jerk bait, I would say, would be the first bait we're going to feature. as very good for inshore saltwater, but also extremely good for bass fishing too. Justin, I know you were trying this out in the backyard recently.
Yeah. So I got to give everybody a quick backstory. I'm 10 to 15 steps from a local pond here within my neighborhood. And I grew up just like you, Luke. I was pond hopping all the ponds around Orlando as a kid. And when I got the chance to drive, like there was no bass that was safe here in Central Florida. So I would pond hop a lot. I did that a lot before I got into kayak fishing and going for redfish and snook and trout. And I had my things I like to use. I was a big Cinco guy, the little like turd looking TRD, plastics, but I would throw a lot of jerk baits, a lot of natural colored jerk baits. And fast forward to now, I have my pond in my backyard. It's crystal clear. These fish end up pushing wakes like redfish around the pond. And in the beginning, they would have eaten anything, but I've caught them a number of times and they've gotten really, really smart. So I've had to figure out how to present different lures to get them to feed. And I can see them. I can see their body. I can see their wake. I can see how they're reacting and moving. And over time, I've tested every single lure we carry on the shop page, and I've caught bass on every single one. But it's a matter of finding the one that reacts or performs or the presentation is right for that day or that moment. I mean, these fish change all the time. So, I mean, I kind of have like the perfect formula to where I can watch these fish and if they're moving real slow and creeping in between the reeds and along the shoreline, Alabama leprechaun all day long, weedless, right up against the shoreline. It blends in. If they're moving pretty quick, if they seem to be on a hurry, I'll throw a slam shady on a jig head and move it really fast, like a little minnow or a shiner trying to get away. And believe it or not, I've even caught bass on the power prawn. And someone's going to look at that and be like, really? There's no shrimp in freshwater. Well, yes, that might be true. And at least here in Florida, there's not white and brown and pink shrimp like we know. But definitely in Mississippi and Louisiana, where you got those two areas meeting, that's a legit forage. I mean, bass will eat shrimp in certain parts of the Gulf Coast. But here in a backyard pond in Orlando, even though a shrimp is not natural food for bass, the presentation is killer because it's hopping in and out of the grass. It's an easy meal, an easy opportunity. They don't really have to think about it. It really wouldn't be that much different than like a crawdad or crawfish in the grass or around a rock ledge. So I think it would similarly mimic that, but it's a crustacean down in the ground. And I think the bass will sometimes key in on little apple snails and little crustaceans on the ground as well. So, I mean, I have like just the whole platter in front of me right now. But I would agree with you, Luke. This is probably the most versatile, and it would allow you to do, you can fish it so many different ways, and different speeds. Sometimes just straight retrieving it pretty quick, that tail will actually wobble back and forth left and right. And it'll kind of be like a swim bait almost. Even though it doesn't have the paddle tail, it'll work very much in the same way. That's probably the go-to tool. I would agree with you.
Let's take a step back and not talk about lures for a second, but talk about really just something that's super helpful. Because the question we hear was number one, because everyone's always, hey, what lure catches the bass? But number two is like, what should I be looking for? And, the three of us all grew up freshwater fishing first. We caught who knows how many bass before we really started catching, a lot of snook and trout and redfish, et cetera. But the one thing that is congruent almost 100% of the time is structure, right? And so a lot of people in our community, for a while there, I was going out in the morning with my coffee and posting some pretty big bass pics. I don't post all of them, but I mean, I post the bigger ones, and we're talking 5+ pounders. I mean, there's one that's about 7 pounds, and people are like, man, where are you? And I'm in a completely public lake, fishing off of a dock and even the shore. There's a little shoreline. So our HOA owns a piece of property on this lake. And so there's 30 houses that all have access to this one little property and one little dock. And no one else fished it except for me. And then, the guys who are on the bass boats. And all I took out there, you guys nailed it, was Alabama leprechaun. I love that one, like slow rolling over some of the old cypress tree stumps and things that have fallen down, like in, 2 to 3 feet of water. The other one was the slam shady, both the 2.0 and the bomber. The bomber, I'll have to go back and look. What's cool about the community is everything is it's kind of like a journal, right? I mean, it's all there documented. So I can go back and look and say, holy smokes, I was catching all these big bass in February, I did see a trend there in the month of February. For whatever reason, I was catching some lunkers in just 2 feet of water. So it's kind of a cool little trend. But anyhow, it was the leprechaun on a weighted hook, the bomber, and then I would have a culprit worm. I like the big, fat, nasty, culprit worm with little sinker weight on there. Like that was my other one that maybe is not so much saltwater, but the majority of the fish were caught on those first two, which is the same lures I use in my tackle bag for saltwater fishing. But I want to hit that real hard because it's so important to structure, right? I mean, these bass, and I've read all the bass books. They're pretty fascinating because you learn a lot about saltwater fishing from the bass fishing books. And that's all they talk about is the different types of structure and, why bass are unstructured. Same thing. It attracts the bait, hides you from, predators. When you're a small bass, you don't have hawks coming down to pull you out from under a tree stump underwater. So structure, I mean, focus on the structure. What do you guys think? And I know you're going to agree with that, obviously, but do you have any tips on which saltwater lures or when you might want to change it up depending on the type of structure in lakes?
So I'll hit that, and I'll go back to that lure that we were just referring to, is the fact that structure is so important, just as it is with inshore saltwater.
Mm-hmm.
That's why weedless rigging is extremely important, because you want to be able to get as close to that structure as possible. In many cases, bumping into it, and if you're not weedless, you're going to be getting snagged, and it's going to be very frustrating. So regardless, for the shallow stuff, like for grass, this is it. And then for deeper stuff, right? Slam shady paddletail with this Texas eye jig head. This is now you can get down there deeper. You can buzz. You can go over logs, right? You can get down if there's rocks or something. You can basically bounce and just go right up in there and get right in that strike zone. Those bass, they're extremely aggressive. That's why the most popular fish in the world. They're just very, very aggressive. Like Justin showed, they bite shrimp when shrimp aren't even in the ponds. They're just aggressive fish. If they see something that looks like an easy meal and it's easy to get, they'll go after it. And so getting right there in their face is extremely important. And that gives a lot of wiggle room as far as what you use too. But just not getting snagged, I would say, would be priority number one. So you can get right in the business zone without having the headaches of losing gear.
Yeah, I agree with that 100%. The only times I think I would ever use an exposed, like on a jig head, a Slam Shady 2.0, or even the Moonwalker, is when these bass are feeding on the surface and they're schooled up and they're out in open water. Then I can afford to have an exposed hook. But 4 out of 5 of my lures are all rigged weedless. And I really like the idea of the Texas eye, whether you use it with an Alabama leprechaun. I forgot that I had mine rigged on a bomber, and that would actually be perfect for fishing hydrilla, where you're trying to punch down through that grass. If I'm working like stumps, like you, Joe, cypress trees, stumps, skipping underneath docks. Oh my gosh. I mean, the weedless Alabama leprechaun is phenomenal for skipping under docks. But along these reeds and drop-offs and thick hydrilla, at least you're in Florida, I think that 1/4 ounce Texas eye is going to be fantastic. Just having that weight on the head is going to allow you to punch straight down a little bit easier in thicker, structure and cover. And these, the bigger bass end up being laid up in really heavy cover a lot of times. So I completely forgot about that. That's a good point. I have it in my box, but that would be a perfect opportunity to use something like that. But yes, regardless of where you're fishing, these bass are really structure oriented most of the time. They're laid up, they're waiting in ambush, similar to like a snook around mangroves. You're always going to find snook around heavy structure, and bass are very much the same way and opportunistic. They're going to feed as much as they can within a short area. So finding points and areas where wind flow will kind of divvy out, and there's shallow eddies combined with trees or 2 or 3 different types of natural structure, grass and trees together. That's where you're going to find a lot of these fish. And you don't want to foul up, because the first time you foul up and you spook that fish off that area, you're going to have to come back again, wait for him to set back up. It could be a couple hours. So I would say weedless is probably the go-to for just about everything.
Talk real quick, because we got a lot of people who listen to the podcast versus watch it on YouTube. Talk about that Texas eye. I think we take it for granted because we've been using it for a while, but there's a lot of people I still say, oh, I've never even seen that before. So kind of talk through that, what it looks like, why it's so cool.
So the Texas eye is really cool. It is a weedless extra wide gap hook, and on the base of the hook, kind of close to the neck of the hook, there's a little bit of a counterweight. And what that counterweight really does is helping to make sure that it pegs the soft plastic a little bit better and keeps it on the hook a little more securely. But the biggest thing on a Texas eye is this kind of free swinging weighted head. The Texas eye's got a big eye. That's what Z-Man jig heads are known for, is that big eye up front. But the Texas eye model has this free swinging head that just kind of moves around. And it helps make sure that you're not restricting the action and intention of how the lure is supposed to move. But that weight up at the front of the head matched with an extra wide gap hook is going to allow the bait to either, if you're using a swim bait, track straight, just like a jig head would. But that extra wide gap hook allows you to rig your soft plastic weedless. So it's kind of the best of both worlds. You're really getting a jig head style head where the weight is at the front of the lure, as opposed to an owner twist lock where you have this keel weight weighted centrally on the extra wide gap hook. And you'll be able to swim paddle tails straight, but you'll also be able to bounce lures up and down where the nose of the lure is going to sink first because the weight is all the way at the front of the lure. I think that kind of gives the most coverage for it. But there's a bunch of different sizes. I mean, we have them in 1/8 ounce, 3/16, and 1/4 ounce because we feel that offers the best depth coverage, whether it's saltwater or freshwater. And a lot of times in freshwater applications, you're fishing areas that could be 2-3 feet, and then again, fishing 8 to 10 feet. So it is important to have different weights so that you can target different depth zones on these fish.
Cool.
And one tip I'll add on those Texas eyes is the fact that the head wobbles. It really, the con is that it's skipping is like, it's horrendous. If you let that head wobble away, skipping is very tough to do. So if you are going to be skipping, the trick is just to put more material up front. So right now you can see I basically put more material so that head, it still wobbles a little bit, but it's essentially fixed, and it skips like 10 times. It doesn't skip quite as good as a fixed head. Yeah, you see that one Justin has wobbling everywhere. It'll when it hits the water, the odds are very high that it's not going to be nice and flush, and that head's going to catch the water and it just won't skip. So if you want to be skipping, just make sure to put more material at the front end above the bend, and that'll basically keep the head in place. Yeah, these are the more I use these, the more I've been liking them.
Yep, that's good. I'm going to mention one other one that I've had luck with, and that is the Redfish Magic just spinnerbait. I've caught some nice bass off the end of the dock, kind of casting around some of the cattails and kind of hitting some of these weed lines. And Luke, do you remember that tilapia on a Redfish Magic? It was no lie. I mean, I got the pictures and a little video to prove it. I didn't weigh it, but I went back later and I was like, holy smokes, like this might have been like a state record. Cause I think the state record 7.5 pounds or something. It like, you know, when a big fish hits like a big bass and that like drag's going out, I'm like, oh my gosh, this is a monster. It was on the Redfish Magic. And I'd gone over a tilapia bed, and even though tilapia traditionally are not hitting lures, like a bass would, when they're protecting their bed, they will, especially if it's flashy and it's going right over them. And I thought I had like a 10-pound bass on because it was fighting like crazy. And I see this big white looking thing come up. I was like, what in the world? It's a monster tilapia. But those spinnerbaits, and once again, I didn't go buy, you know, a bass spinnerbait or the new KVD spinnerbait or whatever. I don't even know what's out there right now. Using the same ones I use in saltwater, and it worked incredibly well.
Yeah, if those are new to that, this is basically just a paddle tail with a single spinner blade, kind of like a spinner bait, but instead of the skirt on the bottom, it's an actual paddle tail. And yeah, I think it's great. Like I used to use spinner baits all the time, freshwater. I've done it some saltwater. I've caught some fish, but I feel like the actual fixed paddle tail seems to outperform the skirt. So I really haven't done it much in freshwater. I imagine it'd be the same situation. Justin, you use those?
I haven't used the Redfish Magic, but I mean, I've used plenty of spinnerbaits over the years in freshwater. I'll use Chatterbaits now for both fresh and salt. And I'll get like I think jackhammer is the most popular one or common one. Of course, I don't have it on my box right now. But for when I'm snook fishing or bass fishing, I love to match a chatterbait with a slam shady, just something white and flashy and loud. I feel like that's just kept it more like centrally profiled. Whether you use a spinnerbait, the Redfish magic, and underspin where the blade's on the underside of the body, that added flash gets that instinctual response. So, I mean, you, Joe, getting a big tilapia, like tilapia don't normally eat fish. They're not hunting and chasing down fish like a bass would, but because you have that added flash and vibration, you just got that really angry response out of the fish. So just another tool to have depending on how you want to present, your lures and what the conditions are for the day.
Go back to the chatterbait. What depth, like what kind of structure are you fishing with that?
Again, it's all about the weight of the chatterbait. I think I have it here. So just like with the jig heads, we've got 1/8 ounce, 3/16, and 1/4 ounce. And ta-da! So with a chatterbait, I think this is a 3/8 ounce head, and that's probably the average size for a lot of chatterbaits. I'm always constantly keeping this on the move. I'm not bouncing a chatterbait, around structure in open water. I'll work this against dock edges. And I think the general depth will be between 3 feet to 5 or 6 feet. That's kind of the general range that I use most chatterbaits, whether they're 1/4 ounce, 3/8 ounce, or a 1/2 ounce. I'm sure I can go a little bit deeper. But these types of lures just, I think, really enhance a paddle tail. They're not great all the time, but in a little bit dirty or stained water, if you're going to work against a dock edge or against some cattails and reeds where these bass are waiting in ambush for a big shad or shiner to swim by, you're going to draw a lot of attention to yourself. So it's just a cool little trick I add. You've done the Redfish magic. I'd like the chatterbait because it still kind of gives added vibration and commotion, but it keeps it all compact in the body of the lure. If the water was super dirty, I would go with a Redfish magic because that blade is far separated from the lure and it just makes that lure seem much bigger. So it looks like a bigger meal, And
it's got a lot of flair, which makes you feel good and you can kind of dress it up.
Wiki flair.
Yeah, very similar to inshore saltwater, where if it's clear water, the extra noise is many times a deterrent. But then on that murky water, those chatterbaits, the spinners, like that extra vibration is very, very helpful. And I'll add one, since we're talking about bladed lures, one lure that doesn't get much love for like bass fishing, but is actually very, very good, is the old trusty weedless spoon. I'm holding a Johnson Silver Minnow. And even though it looks terrible, right? Like I remember seeing this as a kid in my dad's tackle box and just thinking, like, I was like shooing it away and going after all like the plugs that look cool. Thinking that this little curved piece of curved metal is garbage. It works. It flat out works. And the fact that it's weedless too, you can get there right in the business, right there in the structure, right where the action is happening. And it just flat out works. Freshwater and salt. Like Joe, we're in Miami and we're trying to get, we were on the way back from the Keys. We wanted to catch a peacock bass. So we stopped by a couple canals and found some great looking spots, some canals, deep water.
Right behind Home Depot in downtown Miami.
Yeah. We were like, it was
secret spots out.
Yeah, definitely my first like urban experience, fishing trip experience where there's cars buzzing everywhere. But we were throwing everything. I was trying a little bit of everything. And then Joe puts on this weedless spoon and the bass started crushing. And peacock bass, I mean, they're aggressive fish. And in fact, it was weedless. He was able to go through all that hydrilla without getting snagged. And it would get into an opening. And you see this big old, this what a cool fish that is. Yeah. But it would come up and just hammer. Really, really cool.
It makes you wonder, like, before soft plastic lures were made, what did everybody catch bass on? Hard baits, spoons. I mean, like, you ask your dad, like, why is it in the tackle box? And he's like, let me tell you something. Let me tell you about the 8-pounders I used to pull out with this lure. Like, they have to work. They don't just stop working because we're in today's day and age and there's better stuff. The OG lures, like a spoon, like like an old wooden topwater plug or a suspending plug, they still work.
Yep. Our dad, he's 72. He'll still hang with anyone on the boat, and he just goes that old trusty spoon. He can't cast as far, but he just does it, and it works. Although we got him on that power prawn, dude, that 40-inch snook.
Yeah.
Dad's like, oh, this power pond might be the real deal.
Yeah, I took him out to a reef and just showing him, hey, like this has been working for big snook, and I was, he just got to bounce off the bottom. And next time I look over, his rod just keeled over, and the line's the drag is flying out, and it was a giant snook. So he's definitely becoming a believer.
Yeah, Power Prawn and Dr. Juice. Juice is loose. Let's talk about equipment, because that's another thing that comes up. You know, we see these professional bass guys, and they've got 50, sometimes even 80-pound braid to catch a small little ditch pickle. It's kind of laughable, and it's fun to poke at it. But you don't have to have all that. So every 100% of the bass that you got, for you members who've seen my bass picks, and I'm pretty sure Justin's going to say the same thing, and I'm pretty sure Luke's going to say the same thing. We're not putting 50-pound braid on to go catch a ditch pickle. We're using the exact same rod, the exact same reel, the exact same 10-pound Power Pro or J braid with a 20 or 30-pound mono or fluoro leader to catch the bass. Do you guys agree, disagree?
I don't use any more than 20. I just use a 10-pound braid and 20-pound leaders. It's fine.
What I did all through my teenage years and pond hopping. That's all that I've had.
So you don't maybe even lighter leader too, because I mean, when I was bass fishing, I was into it, and I was pure bait caster. Spinning gear was for chumps in my mind. And so I would usually use like 14-pound line, and it would be rare that I would get broke off by anything. Like very, very rare. In most cases, I would get snagged around some structure. But so I think even like a 15-pound leader would probably work. I just use 20 because that's what I have for saltwater, and it seems to do well with fresh too.
I mean, really, a leader's to your advantage. Like a lot of guys just run straight braid a lot of times. And there's scenarios where having that shot of 20 or 30-pound leader or whatever, it could be 15-pound leader, you're getting fish when nobody else is getting fish because you're running like a clear line as opposed to straight braid. So it has its advantages.
Yeah, and the leader is compared to braid is actually a benefit for abrasion, like for a bass's mouth. It's kind of like a sandpapery mouth, and I set up a test assembly with sandpaper to rub line against it with the same force and just see how like braid does versus fluoro versus mono. Braid was the worst, which shocked me. And then mono was the best, which shocked me as well. So fluoro, I just filmed another test of a 15-pound Andy mono, totally crushed a 20-pound Seaguar Blue Label, like the high-end leader line. So
in abrasion.
For abrasion, right? For abrasion resistance. And I was rubbing over sandpaper, so it's mimicking like a bass shaking its mouth, or a snook or a tarpon, whatever. But it's just, again, mind-blowing. Like if you go to a boat ramp and ask anybody there what line is best for abrasion, almost probably 10 of them would say fluoro.
But they don't know why. They just say, oh, that's what I've heard.
Because of marketing, yeah. The marketing has been so heavy on it. It's so much more expensive, so they can spend a whole lot more money to market. And I thought the same thing. I used it for many years. And until I started actually testing it, originally I was testing it to prove how much better fluoro was, just so we can have some data behind it. And I was just like, whoa, I was totally blown away. The biggest surprise I've ever had on any test.
All right. So repeat that. So 15-pound Andy mono outperformed 20 Seaguar blue
label. Yeah. That's probably the most popular fluoro, and it's expensive. And so there was like, as far as cost per line basis, assuming you're buying the leader lines, it was 7.5 times more. So the fluoro is 7.5 times more expensive than that Andy mono. And unless you're fishing super, super clear water where visibility is a big deal, which is kind of rare, particularly in lakes, then like you might as well go mono. Like you're literally better off going mono.
And that was with 15-pound mono. If you had 20 mono, which I know is a little bit different diameter, but people don't think about that.
What I was doing, I was equalizing the diameter. So, and I also did 20-pound Berkeley Vanish. So because it was both 0.4 millimeters, the Andy and the Vanish were the exact same diameters. And then the Andy at 0.4, the blue label was actually thicker. So it was 0.405 millimeters. So it was slightly thicker, yet the mono crushed it. Like it was, again, totally mind blowing. So long story short, you don't have to have the high end Seaguar, fluoro stuff. Just get some line, get a good rod. If you're using lures, the biggest thing is a nice rod, a sensitive rod where you can actually feel those strikes, and you can feel the difference of bumping up against a weed and getting a strike. if you can identify that difference, because both are going to happen and you need to react differently on each one.
You set the hook for both, right? No, is that what you did?
No, definitely did not set the hook on the weed. I remember fishing, Joe, one of your buddies, I won't say his name, but we were out fishing that lake growing up, and we'd be out there. He would set the hook 20 times more than us. And he would maybe catch one fish per trip. Like, he was setting the hook on everything. Oh my gosh, I just missed a giant strike. Oh man, they're short striking me. They're short striking me.
I don't think he listens to this podcast, but he might. He sent me a couple texts or so.
Yeah, I was just like, there is no way
exactly you're talking about.
Like, no way. But he was just bumping. He would just feel some bump, and then now he's jerking the line. But the worst thing that's happening is that means he's on the structure, which is a good thing. He's bumping the structure. That's great. And when you jerk that line, that guarantees you're not going to catch whatever fish was around that structure. But if you just let it bump the structure and then keep their normal retrieve, then you'll feel that thump, because that fish is probably watching it. You bump the structure, now you have his attention. And as long as you don't rip it out of there with the Bill Dance hook set, odds are that fish is probably gonna eat. And so no telling how many actual fish the unknown person missed by.
It's the best one that you get stuck in a log down there and you're like, oh, I swear it was a fish. It must have got me down there. Gator got it, and that gator's sitting on the bottom. It's like the guys you see in the Sebastian Inlet. You remember that one guy we were there with Peter Deeks? And no lie, and the boats get pretty close. I mean, you could hear them talking. He's like, I promise you, Bob, it was a big fish. I think a Goliath got him, and it's sitting underneath structure right now. And the dude sat there for 15 minutes just hoping and praying that thing was going to go. And like, you know what Sebastian Inlet is. I mean, it's just tons of crummy, rocky terrain down there. And I was like, oh boy, Deeks got a kick out of that one. So I think what you need to test next, Luke, is 15-pound mono versus 50-pound braid, because that's really what bass are going to be. I'm just kidding. It's still mind-boggling that
I did. Yeah, just the braid disintegrates on sandpaper, and I think
even like 50 or 60 braid.
All of it does, yeah. But so I mean, just the braid for that, but sandpaper is a little bit more harsh than like a fish's mouth. So I don't think it's that accurate of a test. Obviously, I mean, 50-pound braid. I mean, that's a lot of power. It's a whole lot of power for a bass.
But you can do some lily pads.
Well, the reason why people do it is they're going after really big bass in like super heavy vegetation where if that bass can get its nose down and then get into the vegetation, it's toast. So it's like literally like broomsticking a fish out before they can turn.
Yeah, there's only one. That's only the only scenario where I think that has some advantages. There's people before braid, keep in mind, people were flipping and pitching with 20-pound mono. I mean, because it's strong, it's thick, it's not super sensitive like braid. There's advantages to that, but heavy, I mean, like really, really heavy stuff where you run your boat in there and you can't get out heavy. Like that's the only time where I see a big braid working. But I mean, there's 20 other scenarios that you're going to bass fish, but you don't need it. We're skipping lily pads up underneath docks, which is pretty gnarly structure. And we're still doing it with 10-pound braid. You can still finesse a fish. I mean, Luke, you call it soft hands. I have to say soft hands. They have to have soft hands.
Yeah.
when you get a big fish in structure and you don't want to, just completely horse them out of there. I think the mentality that people have, whether it's fresh or salt, is just putting the heat to them, bill dancing them, and winching. And, sure, that'll work, but you can still pull a monster fish out of gnarly structure if you just take your time with them. If you get that good hook set in them, they're on. And, these bass aren't going to pull a lot of line like a big snook. They're going to, zzz and pull a little bit, and they're just going to kind of sit there. And they're going to be wrapped up in whatever's up underneath the dock or the weeds or lily pads or whatever. So you can still definitely get big fish on light line. It's just that Orange Lake, heavy, gnarly, nasty hydrilla that like a small handful of freshwater guys are going to flip and pitch in that you might need to retool appropriately, but that's few and far between.
Yeah. I mean, I would argue, I still haven't got my 10-pound bass, so I can't say that a 10-pound bass fights any different than a 10-pound snook, but I've caught multiple bass that I weighed that were 7.5 to 8 range. And I've caught a lot of snook that same size, and snook, I would argue fight a significant amount harder. Mm-hmm. And the fact that that I've had multiple situations where just dock fishing with light, like 10-pound braid, and for snook I usually use a 30-pound leader. But anyhow, when that braid gets around a dock piling that has barnacles, right, which don't happen in freshwater, so there's a lot more harsh structure in saltwater environments. I've had many situations where I've saved a big snook, 10 pound or more in some cases, on 10-pound line just by not being aggressive with it, by doing the soft hands, like Justin said. So it's so you can absolutely catch some really big bass, even around structure with light line. You just have to, as soon as they get in that structure, you can feel it, right? As long as you have a sensitive rod, you can feel as soon as that line is around structure. That's when you don't start heaving. You do the opposite of what your natural instinct is. You kind of just be a little bit more gentle. And then because now they're fighting you plus all that structure that's now hitting the line as well. And so if you're ripping at it, now you're just sawing that line against the structure and it's going to pop. Yeah. So I made a mistake many times, and I finally, I heard a tip once where people are just getting snook, like almost like leading them out with hardly any structure. I can't remember who it was, but someone's fishing down in Stewart, and they would hook a big snook on their dock, make sure the hook was set, and then like totally let it free almost, and then just like gently like glide the snook out, and it would follow because it wasn't really scared. And then they start putting the pressure on. So I started trying it, and I didn't go to that extreme, but as soon as that line starts hitting, then you just be super soft with it. It's shocking how effective it is.
So
go for it.
No, I was say, like, all of this that I'm hearing, and like the whole kind of point of this podcast is everything sounds so cultural, like we fishermen believe that only certain things work in certain scenarios. Like if you snook fish, you got to hammer them down. You got to pull them out of structure. You're bass fishing, flipping, you got 65-pound braid, and you just got to torque up on them, one of them big old Abu Garcia Revos, and rip them out. And like what we're talking about is that you can be successful and catch a bunch of fish and big fish in scenarios that you might not even consider. That's one of the beauties of fishing. And one thing that I've always loved when I would travel all throughout Florida, and I fish so many different regions, is I'd have people say, oh, that doesn't work here. But it really does. It's all about presentation and gearing up appropriately and tooling appropriately. And if you do that and you keep all that in mind, structure, finding where the fish are, using different lures and presentations in the right scenarios, you'll be successful on any species of fish. And like all I'm hearing about this, like, oh, you need this for this, need that for that. You might have a little bit of an edge, but at the end of the day, you could be just as successful as the guy next to you that has all, the 4 tackle boxes and the 60 bags of lures. And you can go out there with 4 or 5 lures and just whack them, as long as you know how to use them appropriately.
As long as you got soft hands. Let's take a quick little intermission so I can stir up these mashed potatoes with my soft hands. Is that cool? All right, intermission's over. Let's get back into it. Luke, let's go over to topwater, because I know that's one thing we've kind of skipped so far. And you're not going to use a topwater all year long with bass, but you got a moonwalker there. For those of you listening, Luke is holding up our new moonwalker. And that's the new hooks too, huh?
Yeah, this is the one with the beefed up hooks. This is legit. Beefy. Toughest topwater known to man right here. Yeah, topwater's great. And it's just like inshore fishing where, summertime, so we're filming this in the summer, so we'll just kind of talk about that. It's about the twilights, early morning, late evening, and night fishing. As soon as that sun's up, where you're starting to cast a shadow, that's when it'll start getting worse and worse. But it's a blast, right? Snooker, as we mentioned, they're an aggressive fish. Just like snook, redfish, trout, they'll come up and they will gladly smack a topwater. In many cases, the bigger fish actually go after it because it's actually easy for them to do it. Like it's to their advantage because they're almost like it's like us trying to catch a bird. Would you rather do it in an open field or against a wall? Right? They know that basically the surface is a wall for the prey. They can't go anywhere but one side or the other. And so now that fish just sees an easy meal. And even though they have to travel a little bit to get it off the bottom, they'll go up there and just totally smack it.
Are we talking about shooting the bird? I don't know if I want to shoot a wall in case it like ricocheted or anything, but what are we talking about?
Just grab with your bare hands.
Oh, okay. Bare hand. Yeah. Much more against, I take the wall versus the air. Yep.
Yeah. Sorry. I should have known you'd be overthinking it.
Well, I was like, man, it's a trick question. But now I didn't even hear what you said because I'm worried about, man, what happens if I shoot that wall and then, oh boy.
Yeah, because topwater, I used to think that it was only for just super aggressive fish where they're just really fired up. It's really like a predator-prey instinct where they're just going after an easy meal. And the fact that it's right up there against the backdrop, against the barrier, I should say, not confuse Joe, but it's up there against a barrier, and that just signals to the fish, okay, easy meal. Let me go up there and attack it, and it's just flat out fun.
And so you had the Moonwalker, spooks. Let's maybe a frog. I don't know if you have that with you, because it's another one.
So I was going to mention that. So this is the freshwater lure though, so that's why I didn't feature it, But in many cases, the freshwater, these saltwater lures can translate to freshwater fishing, as we've talked about. This bullfrog, this is the Zoom horny toad, is awesome for bass, particularly over lily pads and hydrilla. This thing it's super weedless, and they come up and smack it. It's shockingly good for redfish, sea trout, snook. I've even jumped multiple tarpon with it. I've even placed a redfish and a trout in one tournament. With this bullfrog against people using live bait. So for certain situations, it works great. For inshore saltwater, it's really about weedless, with a bunch of floating grass. In the early morning, you can't use a normal topwater because it's going to snag all the grass. Throw this puppy and hold on tight.
Do you do a straight retrieve?
Yeah, straight retrieve and skip. The second situation is skipping up under mangroves. This skips has a nice true skip. It goes way up underneath there. I don't know if they think it's a crab. I don't know if they think it's a mullet. I don't really care. All I know is they come up and eat it. Whereas with this does skip, topwaters skip okay, like topwater plugs, but in many cases they'll skip up, and now you're hung up in the mangroves, and when you're using this early morning and you're hung up in the mangroves, now you've got a bunch of mosquitoes all over the boat. Bad news. So for weedless topwater, I now just use this bullfrog, and I've tried Live Target has a hollow body mullet. It works okay. This outfished it. I like this more than the saltwater weedless salt plastics that I've seen so far.
I've seen if you watch a big threadfin herring in saltwater flick and kick its tail, it looks just like the back of that frog. It really does. I mean, if it's like a skittish bait fish, it's freaking out and running away. That's exactly what it looks like.
What's weird is the dark color seems to outfish. I've used the white ones, and this dark one, somehow the dark is like, I can't remember the name of it. Almost looks like a floating turd up there, but they come up and smack it.
Yeah, it's got to be contrast, I'm sure. And yeah, I mean, both light and dark, work well for topwater. For me, for topwater fishing in freshwater, I mean, the go-to is going to be a little spook. I've got the Moonwalker here, but for fish that are aggressive, yes, that's the go-to. Early morning scenarios, chasing shad. We're coming into a great time of the year in fall where, a lot of these bass are just going to be bulking up and feeding up for winter and fattening up. And I'll still use this in open water when they're chasing bait fish, but I really like using it and slowing it down to where the twitches are super injured and super slow, because you'll get some of your biggest fish on topwater. I mean, guys that'll use hollow-bodied frogs, maybe not the Zoom horny toad, but they'll use like hollow body frogs where they just float and they sit in the strike zone. Very much the same way, just slow twitches and very, very long pauses. These big fish will come up and they'll watch it. Because I mean, sometimes around lily pads, for example, to be really specific, you can, if the lily pads are spread out, you can still work a spook with single hooks and not snag the lily pad as long as there's some space in between. And you can stay in that strike zone with a spook and just do 1 or 2 zigzags and just let it sit for, could be 10 seconds, and another 1 or 2 zigzags, and a monster will come up and clobber it. Sometimes those topwaters, working them really, really slow, are going to get you really big fish.
Great tip. That's probably the biggest, for bass in particular. I think one of the biggest issues that I found in my experience with topwater is going too fast and using just traditional straight retrieve. Even with that horny tail, that's why I asked Luke, because some of my best topwater blow-ups over the past couple of years for bass have been what Justin said, like literally to the point it's uncomfortable, where you're pausing, like you're checking your emails, pausing, where it's like, man, what's happening here? It's completely different than what I feel like we do with saltwater topwater. So cool. Anything else, guys? Any other lures or tactics tips?
Yeah, I'll just say a question we get, our club, we specialize in just making it easy, right? Where you can go out there and have some really good trips on the water without having to have like a whole Bass Pro Shops tackle store in your boat or kayak or whatever. So to keep it super easy, like when I go saltwater fishing, this is pretty much all I use, but the same thing for freshwater, I basically take two things out, right? So for shallow water, if it's clear and I'm fishing like hydrilla, I'll go with this split tail jerkbait that we talked about earlier. But if the water's murked up, or they're clearly going after bait fish, I'll use this we call it the Slam Shady Bomber. It's a 5-inch paddle tail. It's a big paddle tail, still rigged weedless on the weighted hook. You can fish lily pads with this. You can skip under docks extremely well with this. This is great for the shallows. It's not, if you're going after deeper than 3 feet, it's not going to work so well. But the soft plastics do. All you have to do is just get a jig head and put those same soft plastics on that jig head, whether it's a Texas eye or the traditional type. So now, it's just as one or just even an open one, right? If you're just going to be skimming over some structure, the Texas eye is probably better because you can get down there right in there with being weedless. But that's literally all you need. You don't need to have any of those things we talked about. When I did a trip to Tennessee, fished with a friend up there, and I didn't have anything to travel with. I knew I was probably gonna go fishing, so I just went ahead and packed a pack of weighted hooks and a split tail jerkbait. And I borrowed his dad's spinning rod. It was a 6'6" spinning rod with mono. I don't like short rods like that, and I can't stand mono. All I used was this, and I was going against this guy who was on the troll motor in front of the boat. I was in the back. He had 6 or 7 rods up there, all with this specialty stuff. Both days, I caught more fish on this one lure than he did with all the specialty stuff. And I saw that the bait was small, right? So I used the same lure, clipped off the tail, started catching a lot of fish. I was skipping up under trees, right? Caught fish, and we were fishing some deep edges of some hydrilla. And I would just go super slow and now even though it's light, it'll still fall. And I caught fish there too. So like this one lure can kind of do it all. So I would say kind of get your lure. It doesn't have to be this one, but get a lure and just get used to using it in various situations, because you'll be shocked at how effective it can be.
That's excellent. Well, guys, if you want those shortcuts, if you want trends, if you want to spend more time with us, I think one of the cooler things about the Insider Club is we're putting out the content and the real-time on-the-water reports that you don't find anywhere else. It's not there on YouTube. And you get real time with us. Every Thursday, we get on a live call with our members, and it's like having a fishing guide in your back pocket. It's like literally having access to full-time guides in your area who could tell you exactly what you should be looking for. Here's what's been working this past week. Because let's face it, most of us are not on the water every day, right? We have jobs, we have families, we got stuff, and it might be a Friday or Saturday or Sunday we finally get out there. It is a massive advantage to be talking to people who are fishing during the week and have a network and a community of people who are fishing all week. It is a massive, massive advantage over the fish, over your fishing buddies, and just ultimately helps you maximize your time and have more fun. So if that sounds like you, definitely come join us in the Insider Club. It's saltstrong.com. You current members, you 25,000 amazing members, thank you so much. You are our family. You're the foundation of this company, and we appreciate you big time. Luke, Justin, I hope you will join me right now in using our soft hands to wave goodbye to our amazing audience. Bye, everybody.
Bye, buddy.
Soft hands here.
Y'all have a good day.
Yeah, stir up mashed potatoes. Here we go. Guys, we appreciate you. Saltstrong.com. We out. Peace.
'Cause fishing, it's in my soul. It was passed down to me from the days of old. You'll find us on the water if there was a way. It's been said my papa, he wrote the book on catching big reds and 20-pound snook. I wish I knew all the things he knew today. For he's the reason why we are this way. And he put fish in our soul.